Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going straight to the heartland of America, to the mind of Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield. He sent a ton of material, articles, book excerpts, even some crime scene photos. It seems like you want to go beyond the surface level.
Yeah, Gein is interesting, not just because his crimes are so gruesome. It's the psychology, right? He wasn't some shadowy figure in the city. He was just a normal guy, a handyman from a small town. And that's what makes it so unsettling. You know, the descent into darkness.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're going to unpack today. And I guess we should start with his childhood. Born in 1906 on a farm in Wisconsin, not exactly a normal upbringing.
No, not at all. His mother, Augusta, she was very, very religious, deeply suspicious of everything outside the farm. You know, she thought it was all sinful and corrupt, and she instilled that fear in Ed, especially about women and sex. She even chose that farm because it was so isolated.
And his father, George, was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And Augusta just hated him.
A volatile
environment, right. And then there's Ed and his brother, Henry, right in the middle of it all.
Yeah. Henry seems to have been maybe the only person Ed actually connected with, but even that relationship, you know, it was dominated by Augusta. And when Henry died in 1944, there were some accounts of suspicious bruising on his head. So some people speculate about Ed's involvement.
Oh, wow. Officially, it was an accident.
Right.
During a brush fire. But those whispers of, something else, something more, well, they make the story even more interesting. Then 2 years later, Augusta dies. And that's when things get really dark.
Yeah, it's a turning point. After Augusta's death, he sealed her rooms off, made them into a shrine, and he became more and more reclusive. And his worldview, which was already distorted, well, it seems to have just intensified. And it's during this time that his fascination with death and anatomy and the macabre, it really takes hold.
He started reading pulp magazines, anatomy books. He even got fixated on Nazi atrocities and headhunters, all that stuff, right?
Yeah. Dealing
with death and the human body in this very distorted way.
Exactly. It's like he was trying to understand the human form, but through this lens of morbidity and violence, trying to, I don't know, put a puzzle together, but with all the wrong pieces.
And then there are the trips, the chilling trips to the local cemeteries. At first, he was just looking at the graves. But it quickly escalated, right? Exhuming bodies, collecting body parts.
Imagine the people in Plainfield, this quiet town in Wisconsin, completely unaware that their harmless neighbor is doing these horrific things at night.
Right. There were rumors, of course. Whispers about weird stuff happening at the Gein farm. People even said they saw lampshades made of human skin in his windows. But nobody could have imagined the truth.
No. For years, he operated under the radar, hidden from the world. But that changed. In 1957, when Bernice Worden disappeared, she owned a hardware store in town.
Her son, Frank, he told the police, Ed was one of the last people to see her.
And that leads to the raid, the infamous raid on the Gein farm. What they found there, well, it shocked even the most experienced investigators. Yeah, they found Bernice Worden's body in a shed, mutilated, hung upside down like something in a butcher shop. Not on some quiet farm in Wisconsin. But that was just the beginning.
It was a nightmare. Skulls on the bedposts, furniture covered in human skin, masks made from the faces of his victims. It's almost impossible to understand that level of depravity.
It really was. One of the officers who was there, Joe Wilimowski, he was so traumatized by what he saw that he actually died of a heart attack later. It said that the memories of that day just never left him.
Wow, it just shows the ripple effect of Gein's crimes, not just the victims themselves, but the families, the investigators, the entire town. Everyone had to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, a stark reminder. The impact of crimes like this, it goes way beyond the immediate victims. The scars it leaves, well, they run deep. They affect everyone.
Yeah. Gein confessed to 2 murders, Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan. She owned a tavern. He used her face to make one of those masks. But he also admitted that he dug up bodies from the graveyards, lots of them. Said he only killed when the ground was too hard to dig.
And the way he described it, the grave robbing, the trophies, it was chilling. So detached, like he was talking about a hobby.
What drove him? Was it some morbid fascination with death? Did he want to become his mother? Or was it something even worse?
He talked about crawling into his mother's skin, about becoming her. He was making a woman's suit out of the skin of his victims, a truly grotesque attempt to bring her back to life.
What does it mean psychologically? Was it like some extreme Oedipal complex? A psychotic break fueled by isolation and his twisted upbringing?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's what keeps people fascinated, even horrified to this day. How could a seemingly normal handyman from a small town do something like this?
And that's just the beginning. We still need to talk about the trial. his time in the mental institution, and the lasting legacy of Ed Gein.
You know, it's like all that isolation on that farm and his mom's, intense religious views and their whole messed up family, it all just built up like a pressure cooker. And then, boom, it exploded in this horrific way.
Yeah, and no one ever, called him out on his weirdness. So it just got worse and worse. No one stopped it.
For years, right? He's just out there on his own, surrounded by all this morbid stuff. And it's a pretty scary example, right? Like what happens when society just ignores someone and there's no mental health help?
For sure. So you mentioned the trial. He was declared legally insane, right? And spent the rest of his life in a mental institution.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that simple, was it?
Not really. A lot of people argued about whether he was actually insane or if he was just really good at manipulating people. That line between sanity and insanity, it can be pretty blurry, especially in a case like this. I mean, it's so shocking. You can't easily explain it.
Right. And sometimes he seemed so normal, even kind of gentle. It's hard to imagine he did those awful things. It's like there were two Ed Geins, the nice handyman and the killer.
Yeah, that duality, right? That's what makes him so fascinating. You think you know good and evil, but then a case like this comes along, and it makes you question everything. It's like anyone could have these hidden depths.
The media went crazy when he was arrested, right? Like nothing anyone had seen before. Reporters from all over the place just descended on Plainfield. This little town became a spectacle.
The whole country was captivated. I mean, it became this symbol of, rural horror. People are always afraid of what they don't know and what might be hiding in those, idyllic places.
And it wasn't just the news. Writers and filmmakers, they were all inspired by his case. I mean, it really shaped how we see serial killers in horror movies.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Think about Norman Bates from Psycho or Leatherface. From Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You can definitely see Guy's influence in those characters.
It's like he became this blueprint for looking at the darkest parts of, the human mind. A way to face our fears, but in a safe way, through fiction.
Right. It's like we're putting all our anxieties out there into these characters and stories so we can deal with them without having to, actually face the real horror.
Interesting. So we've talked a lot about his psychology and how society maybe played a role in all this. But what about the people in Plainfield? How did they react? Finding out this, seemingly normal guy was capable of these terrible things.
I mean, it really divided the town. Some people wanted to just forget it, pretend it never happened, erase any trace of him. Others, they were kind of morbidly curious, like fascinated by the whole thing.
And then some people must have felt betrayed.
Right.
They knew him. And it's hard to accept that someone could be a monster.
Yeah, it changed Plainfield forever. No one felt safe anymore. It made them realize that darkness can be anywhere, even in a peaceful place.
Like you said before, right? Evil doesn't always make a big show of itself. It can look just like your neighbor or a friend, someone you think you know.
That's what's so scary. The monsters aren't always hiding, right? Sometimes they're right there next to you.
We've talked a lot about Gein's impact on, pop culture, but it's important to remember the victims. Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan, they had families, friends, lives. And he took that all away.
Absolutely. We can't forget them. They aren't just part of the Ed Gein story. They were real people whose lives were cut short by these awful acts.
And then all those people whose graves he robbed, violating their final resting place, using their remains for his own sick, purposes.
The families must have been devastated. Finding out their loved one's grave had been disturbed, their remains turned into, imagine the pain and the violation, the lack of closure, and the fear that it could happen again.
It must have been incredibly difficult for everyone in Plainfield to process all that.
And it brings up something else about this case that people don't talk about much. What happened to the farm, his things? What about the town itself?
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation about that. His house burned down, right? A lot of locals thought it was cursed, probably arson.
And his car, the one he used to move the bodies and all that. Someone bought it at an auction, and it became this weird roadside attraction.
It's like even after Gein was locked up, his macabre legacy just kept haunting the area.
Yeah, those objects, they became like remnants of this dark time in the town's history, physical reminders of everything that happened.
So what happened to the land where the farm was? Did they, use it for something else, or is it just sitting there empty? A reminder of all the darkness.
That's a good question. And maybe our listener can do some research and find out. I mean, it shows that people are still fascinated by Gein and how his story continues to, resonate.
So we're getting to the end of this part of our deep dive. It's time to think about what we've learned about Gein and his crimes.
What are your thoughts? What stands out to you?
Well, I keep thinking about how he seems so normal. But he did these horrible things. It's a reminder that evil can be anywhere, hiding in plain sight, even in the most, ordinary places.
Yeah, I agree. This case makes you think about human nature and how complex it is, the dark potential we all have.
It's pretty disturbing, to be honest.
But it's important to think about, because if we don't face these hard truths, we can't really understand them, and we can't stop them from happening again.
Yeah, it's like looking into this really dark mirror and trying to understand what's looking back at us.
And what we see can be scary, right? But it can also teach us something. Makes us think about the dark parts of ourselves, the potential for evil that we all have.
You know, we talked about all the things that maybe led to Gein's crimes, but what about the people in Plainfield? How did they cope with knowing that this normal-seeming guy had done these terrible things?
The town was really divided. Some people wanted to just forget about it, like it never happened, get rid of everything that reminded them of Gein. Others, well, they were kind of morbidly fascinated.
And there must have been some people who felt betrayed, right? They knew him personally. It's hard to believe that someone you know could be a monster.
It changed Plainfield, for sure. They lost their sense of security. It made them realize that darkness can be anywhere, even in the most peaceful places.
Like we said before, evil doesn't always, make a big announcement. Sometimes it looks like your neighbor or a friend, someone you think you know.
That's the scariest part. The monsters aren't always hiding in the dark. Sometimes they're right next to you.
Speaking of monsters, Gein's case really had a big impact on pop culture. Horror movies, books. He kind of became a muse for artists who wanted to explore the darkest parts of the human mind.
Yeah, like Norman Bates from Psycho or Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those characters, they definitely have some Gein in them.
It's interesting, right, how these real-life horrors end up in our stories, our movies. They shape how we see the world and the things we're afraid of.
And those stories, those movies, they help us deal with those fears in a safe way. It's like we're facing them, but from a distance.
All right, like you're getting it all out. Our anxieties and fears, we put them onto these characters and stories so we don't have to, face the real thing.
And maybe by doing that, we learn a little bit more about ourselves, about the good and bad that's inside all of us.
It's a lot to think about. Gein's case raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? About human nature, about sanity, about what evil really is. And even if we don't find all the answers, I think it's important to keep asking those questions.
Definitely. It's not about finding easy answers. It's about looking at how complex humans are, even the darkest parts of us.
And maybe, by doing that, we can learn how to deal with the darkness and create a world where these kinds of horrors, like what Gein did, are less likely to happen.
And for you listening, this isn't the end. Keep learning. Keep asking questions. Keep that curiosity alive.
Yeah, because wanting to understand, even when it's scary, that's what makes us human.
Well said. Until next time, keep diving deep.
Thanks for listening.